Hey, I'm Andrew with 10-Minute Therapy, and in today's video we're going to continue our series on parenting by looking at common parenting mistakes. Now, the truth of the matter is that none of us gets parenting right 100% of the time, and there are a number of pitfalls that we commonly fall into as parents, whether it be in navigating the early childhood stages, the teenage years, or adolescent years. The truth is, we all make mistakes. We all fall into these pitfalls from time to time. And so what we want to do is in this video and in the next, we want to identify some really common parenting mistakes, easy traps to fall into, as well as maybe some ways that we can find our way out of these traps. So without further ado, let's start the clock and we'll get right to it. So the truth is, none of us get it right all the time in parenting. In fact, it's unrealistic to think that we're going to bat 1,000 in parenting. In fact, I want to start off with a word of encouragement today. If we know the truth is that we can't get it right all the time, then what's a realistic goal to shoot for when it comes to parenting and comes to attempting to navigate through the different nuances of parenting? And so I want you to think about parenting much like you would a batting average. Now, we know that some of the best Major League Baseball players, the best baseball players in the world, are going to bat about 300. In fact, Ted Williams, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, batted over 400, which is outstanding. We've only seen that a few times in the history of professional baseball. But the best players in the world tend to bat about 300. That means we're shooting for about 30%. Now, when I say that out loud, that probably sounds ridiculous. And my hope is that when you hear me say 30%, batting 300, that you think to yourself, well, surely I can get it right 30% of the time. In fact, surely I can get it right 40 or 50 or 60% of the time. Or whatever number you might assign yourself, just consider this. If the best baseball players in the world are batting 300, what are you batting as a parent? Assign yourself a batting average, assess and determine where am I at, and recognize the goal is not to bat 1,000. That's unrealistic and will lead to you feeling ashamed and guilty and disappointed, and that's not what we're going for. Instead, let's have a realistic goal to bat 300, knowing we can probably outshoot that any day of the week. And let's now examine what are some common parenting mistakes. So common parenting mistake number 1 is going to be parenting our children in a way as to give them too much nurture and not enough structure. See, the truth is, as we go through parenting, we want to have a healthy balance of both. But one of the more common things we saw, especially through the 90s and what we referred to as maybe helicopter parents, although that came with its own nuances, and what we saw into the early 2000s was that some parents parent with a lot of nurture, a lot of care, a lot of relationship, but lacking structure, safe boundaries, discipline, responsibility in teaching our children. If we have too much nurture and not enough structure, we call that permissive parenting. And the problem with permissive parenting is that it lacks boundaries and guidelines and safe teaching for our children. The truth is, our children need to have the opportunity to make mistakes and learn from them. They also need someone to hold them accountable, help them learn how to take responsibility, how to fix things that they mess up. Without that, if we just sort of let our children free, if we take a laissez-faire, a hands-off approach to parenting, that permissive style of parenting leads to our kids, unfortunately, looking for boundaries that aren't there. And without that, they learn that essentially there's no consequences to their actions, and mistakes they make don't seem to provide any sort of teaching, and so they will continue to make them over and over. And probably one of the real issues with permissive parenting is that maybe you found yourself in this position before where you've given your children too much freedom, and you found that now that it was time to reel it back in, it was incredibly challenging. The truth is, it's easier to keep a healthy, consistent boundary with your children. When you give them too much leeway and then find yourself having to reel it back in, that's harder than just giving a consistent boundary in the first place. So common mistake number 1 that we make in parenting, too much nurture, not enough structure. Now, common parenting mistake number 2 is going to be the exact opposite of number 1. If permissive parenting is too much nurture, not enough structure, then to reverse those two things, to flip the coin, so to speak, and to have too much structure and not enough nurture is what we often refer to as authoritarian parenting. Now, you can hear right in the name, authoritarian is not something that we want to do with our children. What it's saying is lots of structure. You do what I say when I say it, but it trades out relationship instead. There's minimal relationship. There's minimal trust. And instead, what this type of parenting does is parent out of fear. And the problem is that two results tend to come from authoritarian parenting. Either children will obey and they will follow, but they're doing so out of fear, and they have no intention of maintaining relationship with that parent once they hit age 18 and they're able to go and be independent and live on their own. The second thing that can happen is that child essentially revolts, rebels, and fights that parent. And we have a destroyed relationship that leads to no productivity at all. So again, permissive parenting is this high nurture, low structure approach that doesn't give our kids safe boundaries to learn and connect, and maybe even has an unhealthy relationship because it's acting more like a friend than a parent. And when we flip that coin over and we have high structure, low nurture, what we have is a parent that insists upon obedience, but doesn't offer the nurture, the connection, the relationship to connect with that child. And so they learn to either follow suit out of fear or to revolt and rebel. And so if common mistake number 1 is high nurture, low structure, and common mistake number 2 is high structure, low nurture, what's the right answer here? Well, rather than leave you high and dry, we're going to spend a whole episode, 10 minutes, on this theory in the future. But to give you the quick answer, it's high structure and high nurture. That as a parent, whenever I have to raise the structure up, hold my kids accountable, discipline, and teach, I must also raise this level of nurture up so that together we have high structure and nurture. I have both high standards for my child where I teach and I discipline, but I also connect with them and I give them space to experience emotions and I guide them through that. Again, we'll spend a whole 10-minute episode on that in the future, but I didn't want to leave you high and dry in the meantime. So that's mistakes number 1 and 2 of the most common parenting mistakes we see, that we either give too much nurture without enough structure, or we give too much structure without enough nurture, both of which can lead to devastating consequences. Now, common mistake number 3 in parenting that I run into all the time is essentially arguing or power struggling with my children. Common parenting mistake number 3 is to argue or power struggle with your child. Now, here's what I mean by that. We know kids and teenagers can be argumentative. Why? Because that's the way the human heart functions. It wants to seek its own independence. It wants to do what it wants to do when it wants to do it. But the role of parent is often, unfortunately, to say no. That's setting healthy boundaries and safe parameters for your child. And when this happens, your child might try to draw you into an argument. They might use something like this. They might say, why? Why can't I do that? Now, sometimes that why question is what we would call an information-seeking question. That means your child is actually asking for information. Why can't I do it? And it's your job to teach them and answer that information-seeking question by providing a logical, valid explanation. But a lot of times when our children ask why, they don't really want a valid explanation. They want a power struggle. They want to argue with you. They feel that loss of control in their lives, and they're trying to draw you in and take some of your control away. And the biggest mistake we can make as a parent in those moments is to engage in the argument or the power struggle with your child. I think of it like the metaphor of a tug of war, right? When you engage in a power struggle with your child, it's like you're both holding on to two ends of a rope as tight as you can, and you're pulling on that rope. And the problem with a tug of war is it exhausts both of you. Number 2, it pits you against your child instead of alongside them as their parent. And number 3, a tug of war only ends with one or both parties face down in the mud. And none of us want our parenting journey to be described as being face down in the mud for us or our children. So the best thing you can do to avoid common mistake number 3, power struggling or arguing with your child, is to instead put the rope down. Don't power struggle. Don't argue. And let me give you one little tidbit. How do I avoid that? Here's a simple one-liner you can practice. The next time you find yourself with your child or your teenager drawing you into an argument, drawing you into a power struggle, and you realize it in the moment, like, oh, I'm here again. Try with this one-liner. Say, son, daughter, I love you too much to argue with you. And end it right there. I love you too much to argue is one of the best one-liners that I've gotten from all the different forms of parenting that I've been trained in. This one comes from what's called love and logic parenting, to give them due credit. But one of the best one-liners, I love you too much to argue. And you just stop arguing. Because number one, if you're on the other side of that, how do you argue with someone that's using the words, I love you? It deflates the argument. It starts to take the tension out. It starts to suck the air out of that, right? Like a vacuum. And then your child might still try to persist. And you can just say again, hey, I hear you. I love you too much to argue with you. What you might find is it even eases that tension to a point of laughter, or maybe it just frustrates them more, but the argument stops, the power struggle stops, and you now have an exit, a way out of this argument. So common mistake number 3 in parenting is arguing or power struggling with your child. And a one-liner to get you out of that situation, hey, I love you too much to argue. Give it a try next time. See what happens. So to close out our first of 2 videos on common parenting mistakes, let me just remind you of this batting average idea. Here again, let's set aside any unrealistic goals we have as parents, that we're going to be perfect, that we're going to bat 1,000, that we're going to get it right every time. You're not, I'm not, and that's okay. Your child doesn't need you to be perfect. What they do need is for you to do your best, to assess yourself and to improve upon yourself and your approach so that you can love and guide them through whatever they might walk through. That's all they need. They don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be you. So let's remember, the best hitters in the world bat 300. That's 30%. You and I can parent right 30% of the time. That sets the bar pretty low. In fact, I bet we can beat that 7 days of the week. So let's just do a quick recap. The most common parenting mistakes that we run into are high nurture, low structure. We call that permissive parenting. Why is it a mistake? Because it gives your children too much rein. They need you to set healthy boundaries, disciplines, and consequences. They just need you to go about it the right way. Common parenting mistake number 2, we change those. High structure, low nurture. We call it authoritarian parenting. It rules out of fear and it demands obedience at the cost of sacrificing relationship. Your children deserve better than that. We want to shoot for what's called authoritative, high structure, high nurture. Again, we'll cover that in a 10-minute video in the future. And lastly, one of the most common parenting mistakes we can possibly run into is arguing or power struggling with our children. You're the parent. They are the child. You are the wiser, gentler, kinder, more experienced one. So don't allow yourself to engage in a tug of war with your child. Those end poorly with one or both of us in the mud. Instead, the next time you find yourself heading into an argument with your child, just tell them, hey, I love you too much to argue with you. And get out of that situation. Return to your role as the parent, teacher, disciplinarian, guider of children's hearts. That's what your role is. Please join us next time. We're going to continue on this list of common parenting mistakes. In the meantime, I'm Andrew with 10-Minute Therapy. God bless.